Good morning, and welcome to a new episode of Meatpacking Unpacked, Community Connected, brought to you by the Meatpacking District. My name is Jeffrey LeFrancois, and I'm the Executive Director of the Meatpacking Business Improvement District. Today, I'm joined by co-founder and Executive Director of Friends of the Highline, Robert Hammond. The Highline reopened to the public last week after having closed in early March, and we're just thrilled to have it back. Robert had the vision and foresight to lead the effort to build an elevated park on an abandoned rail line in New York City 20 years ago. And in 2017, he formed the Highline Network, which focuses on an equitable development of underused city infrastructure to develop urban landscapes. Robert, thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm excited to be here, Jeffrey.
Good stuff. So, let's start. I got to walk the Highline last week. It's back, it's open. How does it feel, and how has it been?
It was like, I think since it opened, I've been the happiest I've been since this all started. And I think it's a combination of one, I got to spend a lot of time on the Highline, but also just seeing how happy people were being up there. And I keep saying back up there, but I would say about half the people had never been up there their first time.
That's incredible. And this is giving folks a moment to really connect with it at the same time in a way they haven't had the opportunity to do so before.
Yep. It's a much better experience because there's so few people up there. It's wilder, and partly because our gardeners weren't up there for a while, but also normally we can have 40,000 people on a Saturday. If only one person picks a flower in 1,000 or puts their foot in the planting bed, it affects the planting. And so that's one of the reasons it looks lusher, because the planting is growing over you. It's growing over the planks.
I am floored right now.
Over the planks, it just gets stepped on right away.
I never thought about the fact that people, unfortunately, pick the flowers. And so that's why it looked so, those echinacea beds are just incredible right now.
Yeah. It's excruciating when you see a little kid picking a flower. Like, it's always, do I tell them not to? Am I the ogre that stops the 4-year-old from picking a flower? Yes, usually I am.
I'm with you also with our planters in the district, so I get that entirely.
Your planters are beautiful, by the way, and they made it great through the pandemic. When I came back, I was like, wow, these were beautiful when I left and beautiful when I came back. And
this is what it feels like. It was so important to us to make sure the neighborhood looked beautiful upon people's return, because it's a feel-good moment also. So thank you for that. All right, so last year it was 20 years, but I loved what you did for the slogan, if I recall. 10 years an idea, 10 years a park, 20 years an idea, right?
Yeah.
Was that it?
Yep.
So how did this come about in the early 90s?
Yeah. Well, I used to live on 10th and Washington, and I read an article in the New York Times almost 21 years ago. It was August 1999. And it said the Highline was going to be demolished, and I assumed someone was working to preserve it. I called around, no one was doing anything. I went to my first community board 4, which you know well, and the meeting was in Penn South. I remember the room. There was only about 15 people, which, in August, not that bad. Yeah. And I sat next to a guy I didn't know, and no one cared. Everyone just didn't care or actively wanted to tear it down, except the guy next to me. So after the meeting, I said, well, I'm busy. I have a full-time job. I don't have any experience in this. Why don't you do something? And he was like, no, you do it. And we exchanged business cards, which dates the whole thing. And then we decided we'd do something together. And so that was Joshua David, the other co-founder,
right.
Who I lived in the West Village. He lived in Chelsea. So that's how it started. And literally it was exactly, in August, it'll be 21 years.
That's amazing. And then this is going to be the tricky question. So you had the vision, you did the planning. Is what's out there today any semblance of what you thought it might be or could have been, or when you think back to your mind then?
Yeah, that's the odd thing is, Josh nor I we didn't have any experience. So I was sort of in marketing, a part-time artist. Josh was a travel writer. So we weren't architects, designers, planners. So we didn't have a vision necessarily of what it would be. And so we just sort of we liked it as a ruin, and we thought, well, the city should think about this before they just tear it down, because they'll never be able to recreate it. And so that was we never had a mission statement, we never had a vision statement for over a decade. And it really, and that's one of the advantages of it taking 10 years as an idea, is people coalesced around the idea of sort of recreating what was up there, which was this sort of field of wildflowers, and keeping sort of that feeling of nature. But in the beginning, we didn't even know if it was going to be a park. We thought it could be light rail. Both of us really liked that idea. We found it's too really short. People also don't, it just wasn't big enough to do really light rail in our neighborhood. We looked at, my favorite thing we looked at is, could you bring the L train up and curve and have the L train?
That's my dream, to go up, to connect up on the west side. Yes, absolutely.
It turned out you would have to demolish most of 14th Street to bring it up. So, you know.
Kind of held off on that one.
And I don't think people would have been excited having a subway going through their neighborhood, you know.
Correct.
But.
I mean, that's amazing. And I think when I use the High Line, I kind of still use it as a mode of transit, because it removes me from the street. I don't have to stop at intersections. And I go from Meatpacking to Chelsea or Meatpacking to Hudson Yards. And there's something to be said for the fact that, do we have a visitor?
My son just wants to say hello.
Yes, please. Hi, how are you doing?
You're gonna go, okay, go. Okay, yeah.
He loves Zoom.
He's in COVID mode. He's has a shirt on, but naked from the waist down.
That's the uniform.
Yeah.
It's still a mode of transit, I think, it is for me. I think a lot of people think of it that way in a certain sense, which is kind of fascinating.
Well, now it connects. You know, when we started it, there wasn't as many things going on. I mean, the meatpacking was already a thing.
Yep.
But there were so few people living in far west Chelsea. There weren't a lot of businesses over there. And then north of that, there was nothing, you know.
Yeah.
Where Hudson Yards was, you know, it was just train tracks.
Yeah.
So exactly. It's interesting. Then it was hard to imagine what it would connect. But now you have like whole different thriving neighborhoods all the way along it.
Right. So the park's open now from Gansevoort to 23rd Street. Are you continuing talks with the Parks Department around when, folks, it's super narrow north of there, which is the reason it's not open, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's a few things that are different. If you go up there now, it's all one way. So everybody starts at Gansevoort and goes north, and then you can exit anywhere, but you can't get on anywhere except Gansevoort. And then there's timed entry. So that's to help people sort of plan their visit so there won't be crowds when you get there. We're also having people, if you show up, you can most of the time just walk on, but we're encouraging people to do the timed entry, because that way it reduces crowds.
Yeah.
But we're hoping maybe in a month or so to extend it to 30th Street. I think we wanted to see how it go. You know, we wanted this to be as safe as possible. That was the biggest concern for everyone and us. I mean, as soon as we closed in mid-March, we started thinking about how can we open this safely. And it was really the two things. It was the crowds, yep, and the narrow 8-foot path that we have in whole sections. And so that's why we're going one way, so you don't run into that pack where you can't distance, because you're always going the same way. But we're seeing, you know, most days we had under 2,000 people.
Okay, and what are they doing? What are folks doing? Are they just walking from
the same thing? Yes, we're staying on benches, but we haven't had a problem staying too long. We haven't had people, you know, people don't want to sit on a bench with someone else either, so that hasn't been a problem. You know, we thought, do we need to limit the amount of time? Most people are staying under 30 minutes. Because that's about how long it takes to walk it. It's actually a little, probably can do it a little faster if you don't want to gaze at the plants.
Right.
And, you know, a lot of times people aren't seeing that many other people. You know, you can see people in the distance, but you're not up against them. my favorite thing we've done is we put these green spots all over the High Line every 6 feet.
It's
And
awesome.
partly, originally, it was to, help you understand, like when you go to the grocery store, 6 feet, but you're never in danger of being within 6 feet. And to me, it's just to remind you that things are not back to normal. You're up on the High Line, but the world has not gone back. And so we need to keep each other safe. And to me, it's also just, I'm liking seeing the photos now because, you just notice something different. And people think it's an art project. Most people think it's an art project now.
Well, you guys now, of course, you did it with an eye, an aesthetic, and an eye that's appropriate for the park. But it also, it struck me as how important it is in terms of like visually identifying space, and that you see those green dots, and we're all going to kind of have a better idea of what 6 feet means, and what that is. I love that people think it's an art project and that it's not just a COVID reaction.
I took one home. I asked for one, and I put it on my office wall. I just peeled the adhesive, and I'm trying to get my partner to put one at home. But it looks sort of like an art dot.
It does. And the green that you guys use is so distinct.
Yeah, Paula Scheer at Pentagram designed it. When she first showed it, I was like, wow, that's sort of aggressive, And it's something most people don't notice. There's very few curves on the High Line. Like in the design, everything's straight. In our graphics, everything's straight. There's not circles. There's not curves.
Well, trains don't do, that's.
And so when I saw it, I first said, I was like, wow, you're using a circle. And she said, yes, because even subconsciously, it helps you know something is different. And so we put the rules in circles. And I liked it before that. And then I was like, oh, okay.
That's
smart
awesome.
Graphic designers.
And I think that I think in this whole moment is just like continuing to open people's eyes and get them to realize more. And so no matter what that does, it still serves the purpose of, as you said, bringing out something different that people aren't used to seeing there.
Yep.
So, all right, you saved the High Line. We saved the Spur, which we celebrated last year.
And it wasn't just Josh and I. Obviously, there were so many people. I mean, that helped us along the way at every step. And now we still have, we couldn't do this without, we get only 1%. The High Line, about 1% of its budget comes from the city. So we raise all that. And so there's so many people that help us do that. So
absolutely. So in terms of you guys, last year was also Mile Long Opera, which is amazing. And I think you said that and then no, it was 2 years ago, huh?
No, you're right. You're right. It was last year.
Yeah. Okay. You know what? I think I remember the original planning meetings, which were a couple of years ago, and then it came to life. And you guys did tremendous community outreach for that. And will there be another Mile Long Opera? I mean, are there?
I don't know. I mean, right now we're not doing any, programming on the High Line. But I think it could be interesting thinking about doing something. I mean, we learned a lot from the Mile Long Opera that we used right now in doing the timed entry. We used Eventbrite, which is this simple program that people are really familiar with. So we actually got a lot of learning, from that. I mean, one of the things that we're doing, one of the programs, we're still doing our teen program where we hire local teens that work throughout the year. They've been working, remotely, but we're getting ready to recruit a new batch starting in the fall.
That's awesome. What about art? Gail Brewer, the borough president, when she was on this same show, she talked about not just the High Line as a park, but she thinks it's a piece of art in and of itself. And you guys also do a really phenomenal job of curating some incredible public art on there. Yeah.
Go Gail Brewer. Gail was a supporter when she was in the city council. So her support of the High Line goes like way back.
Way back.
So we started the art program about when we opened the High Line, and it's one of my favorite parts because it's always changing. I mean, the landscape is always changing, but it's also the art, and it's a way of bringing some of the best contemporary art free. A lot of art, even if it's in the museum, most people have to pay to go in. And, I just love having that there's no barriers. And, the most successful project we've done is Simone Lee's brick house, which you can see. It's not in the meatpacking, but
that's okay.
It's a short walk.
It is for the city, and it's just so fantastic.
And we're about to do, we're in the process of doing a competition for the next third and fourth. We already know the second one, and we're going to be releasing those 80 design ideas for 80 different artists in August for people to be able to look at and comment on. And then we'll narrow it down to 12. We'll have them make models, and then hopefully we'll be able to exhibit those on the Highline next year.
That's amazing. And again, you're able to do this because, as you point out, your budget is 1% from the city, and the rest you raise all this money to bring this art program to life also.
Yeah. So that's all philanthropic, and like all nonprofits, we're have a big deficit because of COVID, and now opening is costing us more because we're having to staff all these access points. So that's one of our big concerns, is how long can we keep doing this?
Yep. I mean, I think that's everybody, right? Like figuring out how you shift dollars, what's relevant to spend on right now.
Yep.
Is every industry.
Yep.
So what's next in terms of what's the 10-year plan for Robert and the Highline from now? I mean, is there one, COVID aside? What's your next picture?
A big part is the network, because we now have almost 40 projects in the network, and these are infrastructure reuse projects, which is people like, what the hell is that? It just means what we have in common is that we're all like oddball projects. We don't fit into a normal category. There's parks over highways, there's parks under highways. They tend to be long and linear because these leftover remnants of the city tend to be like industrial waterfront, old railroads, sunken, elevated at ground. And so over bridges, and we're really, the goal of the network is to learn from each other. It's not for them to learn from us, but how do we learn from each other? And I think people are asking, do you think it's the end of these kind of projects? And I don't think cities are dead. I think cities are needed now more than ever. And I think potentially good news is, I think you're going to see increased attention in infrastructure funding. I think at some point we're going to pass an infrastructure bill. And, the Highline was built with transportation dollars that we got 20 years ago. And so I think a lot of these projects could find funding through an infrastructure bill.
So is there a city that are there a couple of cities that that you can mention that you've worked with?
Yeah, and I think the other issue is, how do you make the Highline is, we talk about the economic benefits of the Highline to the city and real estate developers, but that's obviously not shared with everybody.
Right.
And so how do you build these projects and share the benefits as broadly as possible? Because that doesn't just happen. And I think that's one of the lessons learned from the Highline is also, once you create the value, it's very hard to capture it back. So you have to capture that value before you finish the project. And
land use and zoning is somehow like all exactly. Of those things.
Your other job. And so really it has to be done with the city. Like a nonprofit can't do that, but nonprofits can encourage and partner with the city to do that. My favorite project, or I shouldn't say my favorite, but the one that I think is really interesting is called the 11th Street Bridge. It's in Washington, DC, crossing the Anacostia River.
Oh, wow, okay.
And it's a beautiful design by Rim Koolhaus, it's incredible, but their main goal is to preserve Anacostia, which right now is a low-income Black neighborhood that is one of the last ungentrified neighborhoods in DC, so we know what's coming. And so, for example, they raised $40 million for a land trust before they even started construction on the project. They do a lot preserving local businesses, preserving the culture. Yeah, if you go to their website, the 11th Street Bridge, they have an equitable development plan, which is, I think, if the Highline was sort of the benchmark for innovative design or creative use, theirs is the new benchmark for how do you do these projects equitable. And I mean that, how do you share the financial and from a racial standpoint.
That's incredible. And I mean, it just goes to show the evolution of this
Yep.
work already. And that's taken place in not that long a time when you
Yeah.
think of the scheme of
10
your
years.
idea and how long the High Line's been around.
11 years. Yeah. And I always like to say, people think, oh, these projects are happening because of the High Line. These projects are happening because they're smart, creative people that want to do something in their neighborhood. I mean, you know, I think what we did is we helped make the crazy credible. So we give people a little more credibility than they might have had because they can say, oh, look, they did it. It happened there.
Do you ever think, oh, I don't want another city to have a park on an elevated rail line?
Well,
Do you ever get a little
no,
bit of that?
I don't. The thing I don't like is that when they say, "Oh, if all they want to do is build something exactly like the High Line, that's not that interesting." And again, I think they should be learning and making them better than the High Line. You know, like we learn from a lot of other organizations. You know, Bryant Park, Battery Park, Central Park Conservancy. That model, you know, of a conservancy model where you have a private group, like a private nonprofit like ours, building and managing a park. You know, that was first done in New York at Central Park. I mean, they didn't build it, but they now manage and operate it. It's a nonprofit.
Okay, so I want to unpack a little bit more about Robert Hammond. And I want to start with the fact that you lived in the Soviet Union for a couple of months. Can you?
It was the Soviet Union then because it was 1987. And
okay.
I read Nicholas and Alexandra when I was in middle school and like fell in love with Russia and got my parents to send me there for spring break when I was in 8th grade, which was odd. You know, I grew up in Texas and it was in the Cold War. And then I just became obsessed with it. And I went and lived over there for 3 months between my junior and senior year in high school. And then later I took the Trans-Siberian. I became a Russian studies major in college.
That's awesome.
And then I stopped. I lost all interest.
As these things happen.
You know.
Yep. All right. Okay, now I have some fire round questions for you. Fun and simple. Brunch or dinner out at a restaurant?
Dinner.
Public transit or bicycle?
Bicycle.
Black-eyed Susans or echinacea?
Echinacea.
White wine or red wine?
White.
And a night at the theater or a visit? Wait, you're gonna correct?
Yeah. Or I like chilled red wine, like cheap red wine that's kept in the refrigerator.
I will put mine on ice, and I've been known to add my San Pellegrino soda to it also. So no, all good stuff by me. And then a night at the theater or a visit to the museum?
Museum.
Yeah, okay. See, those were our fire round questions, so nothing scary, all fun. What else should anybody know about the High Line, about what you guys are thinking or
come visit? You know, and we're limited hours. We're open from noon to 8 right now. I recommend that last. It's just nice up there.
The evening light is gorgeous.
Yeah, it's a little cooler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining us and being here today. And thanks to everybody else for tuning in. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay tuned to hear more from the Meatpacking District and the city's cast of characters across the cultural, political, and business spectrums. See you all next week.